Hi, everyone. I am Juliana DeWillems. And again, thank you, Miranda, for that very kind introduction. I am the owner and head trainer at JW Dog Training in the Washington, D.C. area. I am also, like Miranda said, on Instagram. So I know a lot of probably you from Instagram, which is awesome. So my company and my history with dog training has been with private training for the most part, a little bit of sheltering and dealing with behaviors really across the board. And I am going to get a little bit more into who I am and why, like Miranda said, I do have kind of an interesting take on this topic. And I'm really happy to be here talking about this topic today because I think it's so important, like so important. And so let me go ahead and I'm going to jump in and share my screen and we will get started. Okay. So like Miranda said, I do have my chat up in a separate screen over here, and we have a nice small group today, which is awesome. So please ask questions because this is different than webinars I usually give where I have to say like, oh, I can't answer, specific dog questions, that type of thing. Pretty much if I'm talking about it here, I can answer the question for you. So I hope to have this be kind of as not interactive, but as please participate and ask questions as much as you want while I talk at you. Unfortunately, there's not really like a lot of videos that you can do about social media. So normally in my webinars, I take a break from talking at you and I show videos and I show examples, and I can't do that here. So I am going to be talking at you a lot, and I'm so sorry for that, but hopefully you'll find the information useful. And if you have questions, maybe we can have some discussion based on what I'm talking about. So we're talking today specifically about dog training social media and how to be a savvy, empowered, smart consumer of it, because social media has turned into there's no avoiding it. It's here to stay, and people are flocking to it to get information, which can be so incredible. It can make incredible information so accessible, but it can also be extremely harmful and dangerous because of how easy it is to put information out there. So we're going to talk today all about kind of what red flags there might be about dog training social media, what green flags to look for, how to empower yourself to identify what may or may not be good information. Because it's really like the wild, wild west out there. And all I want for all of you watching, is that you are empowered to know how to navigate it. I can't necessarily tell you like, yes, these are the people to follow, or these are the trainers to follow, and these are the people you shouldn't follow. Like, I also don't think that necessarily serves you, because there are people and trainers and training pages popping up every day that are new on the scene. And when you come across a page on your Discover page or your For You page, it will be helpful for you to know how to navigate that and say, okay, this feels like somebody I want to listen to and I should learn from, or I'm not really liking what I'm seeing here. Maybe I'm going to make sure to not take in this information. So who am I? And not necessarily in the sense of like, let's learn about your presenter. More so, why am I qualified to talk about this? So I am a certified dog trainer and a certified dog behavior consultant. And those two things are different. Dog trainers, well, we don't really have like an agreed upon label, but I will tell you that the certifications for dog trainers are often revolve around teaching behaviors and understanding how dogs learn and how to teach behaviors. And the behavior consultants are dealing with a lot more of the behavior, what we would call like behavior modification, reactivity, aggression, anxiety. These labels are not guarantees, and I'm going to talk about that later. Just because somebody is a dog trainer doesn't mean they don't do behavior consulting, and just because somebody is a dog behavior consultant doesn't necessarily mean that they don't understand the mechanics that go into training. But it is important to know that there is a little bit of a distinction between people who maybe do service dog work, teaching obedience behaviors or task behaviors or like puppy training, adolescent training, basic manners that we call it. And then the folks on the ground who are working with reactivity, aggression, fear, and anxiety. Those groups can be very different behavior or different trainers and require different skill sets. I also have a dog training business, like Miranda said, in the DC area. So I have, I would say, like an interest, and I care a lot about kind of ethics of dog training, and how I kind of run my business and how I present to the public. I care a lot about that as a business owner. I am also a dog mom and a consumer of social media, like a lot of you. I'm a dog parent. This is me and my dog Lola. So I am also, in addition to being a dog trainer and behavior consultant, I do consume content from the lens of just being a dog mom, like a lot of you are, a dog parent. And I'm just spend a lot of time on social media, in the sense that I consume a lot of it. I'm a millennial. I have been on the internet my whole life, and I'm very plugged in. I'm very tuned in. I talk to Miranda all the time. I'm like, "Ooh, did you see, like what's happening on over on this page?" And she's like, "Juliana, like, sorry, no, I was busy training dogs all day." And I was like, "Well, me too. But in every second of my spare time, I was on social media." Not a good thing, not something I necessarily want to brag about, but I am on social media a lot. And then I also do have a very large dog training Instagram account. So I am, in addition to somebody who's consuming content, I am putting content out. And I do want to do a little bit of a disclaimer that obviously, as the speaker, I'm delivering a lot of this information through my personal lens that includes my personal kind of ethics and feelings about social media. So, keep that in mind too, that what I think is kind of responsible and professional and safe and desirable on social media, somebody else might not necessarily agree with. So kind of keep that in mind. Unfortunately, we don't have like generic rules for social media, or we don't have even generic rules for like the dog training industry. And so do know that I am bringing a little bit of my own kind of how I would love to see things done, and what I think is really responsible and a positive way of moving through the world of social media as a dog training account, because I have that experience on that end as well. So in order to talk about dog training social media, we have to talk about dog training. And the reason that this is important is because one of the biggest issues with dog training social media is there is a lot of misinformation out there. In case you didn't know, dog training is a completely unregulated industry. That means that literally anyone can call themselves a dog trainer. Joe Schmo across the street, who's quote unquote had dogs his whole life, or Sally, who decided that they want to, change careers from a crossing guard and decided they want to become a dog trainer, and they start taking your money the next day. Like, anyone can call themselves a dog trainer. And it's also really important to remember that we have no requirements in this industry in terms of credentials, licenses, education, anything like that. Unfortunately, there is no one single organization that we're all required to get certified through. There are no necessarily, we have not figured out kind of standards across the board with dog training. And so because of that, you have to be extremely careful about who you're listening to, because somebody could start a social media account, be good at social media, and gain a lot of followers, and it can look like they might be somebody who you would want to listen to. But we'll talk all about how to kind of figure that out. But you have no idea what their actual experience or education is. Experience alone is not enough to be a dog trainer. There are people who, it's like saying like, "Oh, I had kids, so I can be a child psychologist." It's like, well, actually not quite. Or I have teeth, so I can be a dentist. Like, just because you've had dogs your whole life, unfortunately, does not mean that somebody automatically knows or understands dogs, dog behavior, how dogs learn, all that. So please know that and be wary of that. One thing that is important to note is that dog training is a mix of facts, science, which I'm going to dive into, personal experience and someone's own personal values and ethics. And I think to leave that out of the conversation would be irresponsible to note how much our own experiences are with both dogs and life impact how we view dog training and how we view the way we choose to interact with dogs, as well as our own personal values and ethics. And as we know, values vary from person to person, and somebody's personal ethics around dog training are going to vary. That's, we don't live in a world, thank goodness, where, well, I think it's good that we all kind of bring different values and ethics to the table, or different perspectives, I should say. And just because I value one thing and care deeply about one thing doesn't necessarily mean somebody else does. So we do have a large body of information that we kind of do regard as fact, but we're also bringing our own personal anecdotes and values and ethics into the equation when it comes to dog training. And every single person you see on social media, even if we all agree on the facts piece, the personal experience and the values and ethics piece could be totally different. So let's talk briefly about that facts part of that. So we have a lot of science to back up how and why people train dogs and why people train dogs the way that they do. So I'm going to very briefly talk about the difference between science and pseudoscience because it's very important. So science is essentially some knowledge or general truths or the operation of general laws. Notice how there's a lot of like general and not vague, but kind of not concrete, obtained and tested through the scientific method. So that stuff that you learned in elementary school and middle school about the scientific method, that is all actually super important. I will not cite the steps to the scientific method because I don't remember them, but one big piece is like peer review and that you can replicate your results. I think Miranda is the scientist of the two of us, so I could be wrong, but I know that those are really important pillars of the scientific community that we try not to, with science, make claims based on maybe like a single study, or even, we have to see results kind of replicated before we start to make hypothesis, maybe. I'm not going to say anything more about it because I know I'm going to say something wrong, but it's really important to know that there is a system and scientists really care deeply about the integrity of that system. And it's created to make sure, okay, I'm not going to say anymore because again, I'm going to get it wrong, but science is important. Let's talk about some of the sciences that dog training and behavior cares about. Applied behavior analysis, ethology, neuroscience, cognition, veterinary medicine. These are just a few of the sciences that go into dog training. Those all hopefully sound familiar to you, and they are clearly very legit and widely studied. There's a lot of information that we know about all of these fields, and we pull from all of them as dog trainers and behavior consultants. So then pseudoscience, what is that? This is important because pseudoscience risks being very dangerous. And pseudoscience is basically anytime somebody says something, whether it's a theory or a statement, and claims that it's science, but it's actually not at all. So there's no scientific method involved. There's no, it hasn't gone through the same system that science does. I'm going to compare them in a second, but we unfortunately do have quite a bit of pseudoscience in the dog world, including things like dog psychology, dominance theory. Unfortunately, these are all things that we in the dog world, dog training world, have, they've been kind of regurgitated for years over and over again. Some people really deeply follow them, but we don't have real science to back up either of these things. So if you compare those two categories, applied behavior analysis, ethology, neuroscience, cognition, veterinary medicine, again, very legitimate and well-studied for decades. And then dog psychology and dominance theory, where there might be a lot of information out there about it, but where's that kind of information coming from? What's the root of that? What information do we have to back that up? And a lot of times the answer is not really much. So just really quickly, again, some more comparison of science and pseudoscience. Science really aims to kind of make general ideas based on information discovered through studies, through multiple studies, through peer-reviewed studies. Science is constantly changing and evolving. We're constantly learning more. We're constantly asking questions. Pseudoscience is very fixed. It makes wide sweeping claims. There is no peer review process. There's no like fact checking. There's no, the quote unquote results have not been replicated. There's just, it's like really comparing apples to oranges. And it's important to understand that pseudoscience being claimed as regular science can be extremely harmful. So that brings me to, why should you care about science or pseudoscience? So that you can recognize if something is likely to be a fact or not, or if something is likely to be rooted in science and fact and what we know versus maybe somebody's opinion or pseudoscience, or maybe even just none of that, something just somebody made up. It's helpful to understand the difference between these two and what science is and isn't, so that you know if you should take information and advice to heart or not. Like, is it something that you should apply? Is it something you should say, that's really helpful to know? Or I don't think that that's actually such a good, I'm going to leave that piece of advice back where I saw it and keep scrolling. Pseudoscience runs the risk of being extremely harmful and dangerous. It's not always harmful and dangerous, saying something like, what's like a silly example? An example that I heard in a lecture last year at a dog training conference was that initially, and I think maybe we have some studies coming out about this, but we've had a lot of hypothesis that slow blinking at cats can be calming to them and can create calming behavior from them. And I think for a while we didn't have much science to back that up, and that might be changing, but that would be an example of like, if people go around slow blinking at cats, there's probably not a lot of harm and damage that can come from that. Versus, if somebody went around saying, oh, you have to like grab a cat by its scruff to make it like you or something like that, and claim that that was fact, that would be extremely harmful and dangerous, which it sounds outrageous, but unfortunately, that's the equivalent happens in the dog world all the time. So it's not always going to be harmful and dangerous, but it absolutely has it can be, totally can be. And then scientific principles and science exists, whether somebody acknowledges it or not. So just because somebody says, I don't listen to behavior science, I don't use behavior science, I don't care about operant conditioning, classical conditioning, those are science phrases, you don't have to worry about them. Like it's still there. So again, it's like saying, I don't believe in gravity. Well, that's nice, but it still exists. So it's important to understand that just because somebody says, oh, that science stuff, it doesn't mean the science doesn't exist, in the principles that we've learned through science absolutely still exist. So continuing on to where the science takes us when it comes to dog training and behavior. Behavior is a study of one. And what that means is that every dog is an individual. We have guiding principles and understandings of behavior based in the science. And that science tells us that behavior of an individual is impacted by their genetics, the environment they live in and they've experienced, their learning history, their experiences, and more. And each of these categories, we know a little bit, for anywhere from a little bit to a lot, about how that impacts an individual's behavior through the science and decades of research on each of these categories. Again, some of them we know a little bit more than others, but we understand how incredibly important every single one of these factors is to an individual dog's behavior. That's why as behavior consultants, we run through all of this stuff in our consultations and our work with clients, because it all really matters for, your dog barking at cars is going to likely be rooted in all of these. There's going to be driving factors from all these categories. And so that brings me to say, social media does not know your dog. Social media does not know your dog's genetics, your dog's living environment around them on a daily basis, learning history, experiences, none of it. They do not know anything about your dog. I mean, even to the point of like, even if you've DM'd with a trainer or something, there's only so much that you can convey in a DM. And as trainers, those of us who do have credentials and certifications, we have a ethical obligation to not give out advice to people specific advice to people who are not our clients. So even if you are sharing a little bit about your dog, maybe in the comment section or in a DM, it's still not enough to give somebody a full picture of what could be going on with your dog. So keep that in mind for later. And in addition to behavior being influenced by a lot of things and all animals and dogs and learners being individuals, behavior is extremely complex because of all of those factors that go into behavior. There's never, ever, ever. Okay, I'm sorry. Oops, I'm breaking my own rule. I'm using absolutes. There's very rarely a situation where there's one single boom, you're done, quick fix for behavior, especially for more complicated behaviors. They don't exist. Quick fixes do not exist in behavior. They do not occur in behavior. Behavior change can be an extremely lengthy and challenging process because you're dealing with a sentient living creature who has their own, like we said, genetics, environment, learning history, experiences. All of these things go into behavior, which means starting to change behavior can be a huge task. Behavior consultants work very, very closely with their clients to start to change behavior. And it is not something that occurs in one lesson, and it is not something that occurs ethically. In often even just 2 or 3 lessons, it can be kind of an ongoing learning process as this living creature learns how to change their behavior, especially when dealing with more complex and challenging behavior issues. So now that we know a lot, we covered a good amount of kind of dog training and where dog trainers get their information from and where are the kind of responsible places to get information from and the responsible information to share. How do we now spot when misinformation is happening on social media? And if a trainer is sharing misinformation. So if a trainer speaks in absolutes, that's a little bit of a red flag to me. Depending on the statement, it can be a little bit of a red flag or a big red flag. So like always, never, dogs should never be on the furniture. What? Like, first of all, why? But then there's likely going to be an exception to every quote unquote rule. So always and never statements can be really risky. Dogs should always walk on a 10-foot leash. Well, why? Again, you don't know my dog. You don't know our situation. What, like why? The always never, it's just, it's very dangerous. And there is unlikely to be a dog fact statement, information, anything like that applies to every single dog. So it's same exact thing on that next slide, all dogs blank. And again, these statements can be harmful or they can be benign and not harmful, but you still want to look out for them. So something like all dogs need exercise. I would pretty much agree with that. That's kind of exercise is a broad term. And yes, I would agree that exercise is extremely important for dogs. All dogs need 2 hours of exercise a day. That's getting too specific and absolutely will not apply to every single dog. Talking about curing or fixing behavior quickly, like we just talked about, talking about quick fixes. So quick fixes are unlikely in behavior, and before and after videos, especially, that seem to be like bragging about quick fixes, to me are a big red flag, because it just is, it creates unrealistic expectations. It is unlikely to have ever been done in an ethical way. Again, knowing what we know about behavior change and how much work it can take. And I think it can absolutely make you as the pet parents feel really crappy about kind of the progress you may or may not have made. And I don't see a time when a single lesson before and after video is likely to be responsible. So anytime somebody says, oh, in one lesson that, we cured this dog's reactivity, that's a big red flag for me. And direct advice about your dog, whether that is in their posts or in DMs and comments, meaning like if they're if they wrote a post and they said, this is how you should with your dog, this is how to address jumping with your dog, that is unlikely to be responsible, because they don't know your dog. They don't know when your dog jumps. They don't know why your dog jumps. They don't know what happens after your dog jumps. Like, they don't know your dog. We're going to talk about some language that people can use instead of direct advice, but be very, very careful to when trainers do try to give that direct and just direct advice about your dog. So Stacy brings up a good question. Thank you, Stacy. Positive reinforcement / ethical trainers also use always never statements. So an example would be positive punishment is never needed. So, and I appreciate that you brought this up. And I think it's something to keep in mind. It's something that if you find yourself saying that, which trying to think if I would say is never. I mean, okay. This is where like values and ethics come in, right? And that's where I think what I think is important to recognize, that if somebody says always never about what dogs do or don't need, because there will absolutely be people who say positive punishment is never needed, and they will say, I disagree with that. And because that is getting a little bit closer to gonna be careful with my words. I think that gets a little bit closer to opinions. Like the science doesn't say that positive punishment is never needed. Does the science tell us like there are risks with positive punishment? Absolutely. Does the science tell us that positive reinforcement can be highly effective? Absolutely. But from a science perspective, we have to be careful about claiming something like that. So then if you do find yourself wanting to say positive punishment is never needed, know that if that is going to be more on the experience, opinion, values, ethics side of things.
Can I jump in real quick, Juliana?
Please.
Yeah. So it's a really hard topic. And I think you absolutely hit the nail on the head that there is a difference between the science of things versus the ethics of things. So, the science doesn't tell us that you need positive punishment. The science can't tell us needs at all. It just tells us what things have what impacts, right? So we have a lot of things that can tell us what happens if you administer shock to rats, if you give birds, treats when they peck on a thing. So we have a lot of science around that. We don't have science that says what things are better than one another. So I think there's absolutely an argument there. There's also an argument to be had over how we make these statements and why. So oftentimes when we say that positive punishment is not needed, and for those that are like, what are we talking about? Positive referring to adding something that punishes the dog. So whether that's yelling at them, shocking them, jerking on their collar, things like that. The idea where we often say no dog needs that comes from the idea some dogs just need punishment. Some breeds just need punishment. Some dogs are too stubborn. So I think sometimes we get ourselves into a sticky spot where we are responding to someone giving us an absolute or giving us something that is not factual. And sometimes in our response, we make things seem factual that maybe are not. So I think we sometimes have to kind of confront this idea that social media is also not built for nuanced discussion. And so some of the things that we talk about may not be, they're not going to get the level of depth that we might need in order to explain the absolute. So there are some things like saying, hey, every dog should have their enrichment needs met. Like, absolutely, that's an absolute. We think it's true. Saying every dog should have their breakfast in a Kong is really where we start getting into issues. So it's those prescriptive things where this sense of absolutes gets wonky, because we do live in the real world. Things are different. They're different for every dog. There's also a sense of, who determines the punishment, right? Suzanne Clothier says she does not like the term force free because she's like, well, we keep dogs on leashes and in collars and in homes and barriers and doors, and those are all their own kind of force. So I think sometimes we can get into the weeds a little bit with some of this, but ideally what we're really looking at is for things that say every dog should go for a 5-mile walk every day, or every dog should always be crate trained and stay in their crate overnight, or dogs should only be trained using hot dogs, not chicken, whatever these things are that are more into the nitty gritty versus like dogs should have appropriate welfare and so should their humans. Those are the ones where I feel like most of us can say that there's an absolute that dogs should have what they need. What we think that goes into is quite different. But when we talk about these red flags, it's really more these specific recommendations. This is always how you should treat reactivity. This is always how you should do this one thing, because it may not be true in every case.
Thank you. And I totally agree. And I think that's why, thank you, Miranda, for jumping in, because I think having a longer form place to talk about these things and kind of talking through them is helpful, because I generally go around regurgitating like, no absolutes in dog training, which is like so funny. I would never use an absolute dog training. There you go. But there are definitely some things that are general for all dogs. And I think a huge part of this is using your critical thinking. And again, saying like, maybe depending on how much detail there is, how intense the statement feels, really using your kind of best judgment and thinking, knowing what you know now, which is we know a lot, we have a lot to back up why we say the things we do. And is it rooted in kind of science? Is it rooted in somebody's opinion, somebody's experience? Looking at that always or never absolute statement, that all dog statement, and saying, does this feel like something that would apply to all dogs? Great talk. So this is a big red flag for me when a training account, training page judges or shames owners. And I have a huge problem with this. I think I just try to live my life like not doing this. And I'm in the business of positive reinforcement dog training, which means I'm in the business of positive reinforcement human existence. And I don't think judging or shaming is ever necessary or never necessary. I don't think it is nice. I don't think it's kind. I don't think it is productive. And a page or a post or anything like that that continuously blames the owner or the guardian feels that to me is a red flag, because there are ways to educate, there are ways to inform without blaming the owner, without shaming owners, without saying it's all your fault. These are all the things you're doing wrong. That's just not, and for some reason, the pages, I would think like people just wouldn't listen when information is given like that. But unfortunately, a lot of pages that do this do have a lot of people are listening to them. And so I don't know if some people think like, oh yeah, like I'm such a bad owner, I have to get this like quote unquote tough love. I mean, we are a society of punishment. So our cultural fog tells us that this is normal or we deserve this and stuff like that. Like you don't. I really would love for people to surround themselves with dog training information and advice that really empowers them and builds them up. So I definitely recommend coming to the Every Dog webinar about how anxiety can transfer between dog and owner. I think that's really interesting. But again, anybody who says you're causing your dog's behavior on social media, they don't know you, they don't know your dog. And there's no evidence sweeping claims that said if people do this, their dogs will behave like this. So that's really a red flag to me. If there's a lot of phrasing of what you're doing wrong and not giving information about what to do right, and then rules about how your specific dog should or shouldn't behave. Again, like dogs should always sit before going out the door. Dogs, shouldn't jump during greetings, all this stuff. And in general, I really try to avoid should statements, should or shouldn't, because should feels like it comes with a lot of judgment. I've actually practiced changing my own language. If I find myself wanting to say, should dogs should get enrichment every day. We'll say that. I find myself wanting to change the phrasing. It is beneficial for dogs to get enrichment every day. It's because that should, if there feels like there's some judgment in that, it's like, I just, in my own life and when I talk to the people in my life, I really try to avoid shoulds, because it can bring a layer of judgment. And like, if they should, like, well, why aren't you? You know what I mean? That feels kind of like, oh, they should be doing this. Okay, well, why aren't they? Let's get to the root of why that isn't happening, or why it would be recommended for that to happen. So if a page recommends harsh training, that is a red flag to me. So going back to kind of what the science tells us, we know that there is documented fallout with punishment procedures, and there can be risks involved. And does this guarantee that will always happen? Not necessarily, but there are absolutely risks. There are risks with, honestly, there can not the same kind of risks with all kinds of training, but like, of course, training can be incorrectly applied. Training can be done poorly. Training can be done in a way that is harmful if you try to do it yourself without the help of a professional. There are always risks. However, some training comes with more risks than others. And so punishment specifically, again, what Miranda was just talking about, where we are aiming to reduce behavior, that we know there's documented risks to that. And so blanket advice about punishment specifically can be extremely harmful, again, because we don't know, nobody on social media knows your dog, and nobody knows what could potentially happen if you follow that advice about corrections or punishment. An incorrectly given treat is way less likely to be harmful than an incorrectly delivered correction. So really keep that in mind. And that's going to be even, I saw a video about somebody teaching stay, and the person said, if your dog breaks, just give a verbal correction and put them back into place. And while that feels benign, if you have a shy dog at home and you go and try to do that with your dog, you have no idea what you could accidentally do to your relationship with your dog. So it's just really, really dangerous and not worth taking the risk. Dominance theory is super outdated. So that is a huge red flag. Anything related to being alpha, you want to be really cautious about. Talks of leadership that starts to become, again, like alpha, these like kind of weird claims of, like you have to go through the door first, you have to like eat before your dog. I'm so far removed from the alpha world. I don't even know what else they're saying these days. But it has long been debunked. It's like any type of alpha theory, dominance theory, alpha stuff, like red flag. At this point, even trainers who don't necessarily train how I do, who do mix corrections and punishment, who do some of this punishment stuff from the first bullet, even a lot of us agree, no matter how we train, that dominance theory is like totally, it's very, very harmful, and it's not rooted in any science or facts. And so very big red flag. And in general, go with your gut. If it feels off, if you read advice and you go, ooh, that feels yucky, I don't want to do that to my dog, listen to your gut. You know your dog best, and you know what your dog best. You know what you care about with your dog. So if advice feels yucky to you, do not follow it. That goes across the board, whether you're working with a trainer or getting information on social media. So because I just spent 20 minutes telling you what to look for to avoid, let me tell you what to look for that I do recommend you seek out when on dog training social media. I totally recommend looking for advice that feels like it fits with your values, your ethics, and what you want your relationship with your dog to be. So if you have an idea of what you and Fluffy do and don't want to do in this world, and you find advice that feels good to you, great. That sounds like a green flag to me. I would recommend looking for looser language around advice. So there's a lot of ways to soften up things like, this is how you do it. This will do X to your dog. You should always. There's a lot of ways to soften that. You can say, here's one way to do it. This can possibly do this to your dog. It might be helpful too. So I do recommend looking out for softer language when it comes to advice. I think it means that the person has some mindfulness and an understanding that all dogs are different, and that their advice that they're giving out might not work for every single dog. So even I have incredible colleagues who still give very directed advice, and it still, every time I see it, I'm like, but like, how do you know that Fluffy could learn down like that? Like, there's like 6 ways to teach a dog to lie down. I don't think it's necessarily fair to tell people this is the only way to do it, or this is how to do it. And the great news is that trainers can convey information and share techniques without saying, this is the way to do it, or this is what you should do. So I recommend looking for those. I recommend looking for pages who value continuing education. The dog training field is always changing. Like I said, science is constantly learning new things, asking questions. I think somebody else who would do this presentation might put information up here about certifications. And the reason that I didn't is because it is absolutely helpful to look up certifications. However, in my opinion, it doesn't necessarily guarantee that that the training advice is going to be good. And I also don't want a lack of a certification necessarily to stop you from following somebody if they hit all these green flags. So I think if you want to look for certifications, that's great. Just like everything else, be mindful that a certification, somebody took a test and got a passing score, and that's great. And that can mean a lot. And they still bring a lot of their own stuff to the table. So just keep that in mind. I definitely think it's important for a page to talk a lot about, or be very open and transparent with the fact that they are constantly learning. This feels like a no-brainer, but unfortunately it might not be, that the training page you choose to follow treats dogs treats the dogs that they train as sentient beings, not as robots, not as, I guess like robots is really the alternative of a sentient being. But, you'd be surprised how many pages maybe don't take the dog's emotional state, mental well-being into account, and they only care about behavior training results. This is where my own personal ethics come into it. I think we absolutely always have to care about we have to, as much as we can, care about the dog's emotional state. So just keep that in mind. I think it's extremely important for pages to be transparent about how they train. So videos can be helpful for this. A video isn't a guarantee. Like I said, videos that are revolved around before and after, like kind of bragging about quick fixes and before and afters, might not necessarily be the best, although body language will be very telling there. But in general, seeing how somebody trains can tell a lot about how the dogs feel with them, how what training methods they use, and what advice they typically give. So videos can be very helpful, but, I wouldn't say a make or break it, but I think seeing videos that you're comfortable with can be helpful. And I think pages green flag is if they're respectful to dog guardians, to you all. If they treat you with kindness, they make you feel welcome, they make you feel understood and seen and supported. Great. I think green flags all around. So how can you as a pet parent empower yourself when navigating social media? So we didn't talk a bunch about this. I just touched on it briefly, but learning canine body language is going to be super important, or starting to learn, or at least understanding that canine body language is an indicator of how a dog can be an indicator of how a dog is feeling when training. And an exercise that I have done both with dogs and with horses is to watch videos on mute and just watch the body language, because voiceover or captions can tell a story that might not really be happening. So understanding canine body language can give you a huge leg up in knowing what's really going on the training page. And really ask yourself, what is important in your relationship with your dog? What do you value? What do you care about? What do you want your relationship to look like? Because like we said before, if you are finding advice or pages that aren't in line with that, then, that's not something you want to be taking in or following. I wouldn't recommend, at least. Just use critical thinking, and approach advice with a grain of salt, and take in information cautiously. I'm not saying necessary. Well, if you wanted to approach everything skeptically, that might keep you a little safer, but I'm not saying that you have to necessarily be skeptical about everything that you have, but, or everything that you see, but, just be careful about what you're taking in. And please judge pages based on the criteria that I just went over for green flags, not on follower count or flashy videos. And this is from somebody who does have a big following. I don't want people following me just because I have a decent following. I want people to follow me because they feel comfortable with the information that I'm giving out. Like I said before, anyone can call themselves a dog trainer, especially with these Gen Zs coming up, and they know how to use TikTok. They know how to edit videos. They're really good at making compelling videos. And it's just please don't look. If somebody has thousands and thousands of followers, that is not an indicator necessarily that they are any good. So really use your critical thinking skills. And please keep in mind, social media is a highlight reel. Again, speaking from somebody who shares training videos, me and my team are out training dogs all day long. And I post literally 20-second clips. So I cherry pick the best clips, the ones that I think will translate the best. It is totally a highlight reel. It is a moment in time. Again, that 20-second clip, if I have an hour lesson, I clip the part where they didn't bark at other dogs and I posted it. And it looks like this dog is, cured of their reactivity. And please keep in mind that there is so much more to the picture than you're able to see. Social media does not allow for nuance or context. It is just a fast-paced, quick, short platform. And there is benefit to that, but there are huge risks. So please keep that in mind. If you're really wanting to learn more, like books, webinars, conferences, that's where you're going to be getting more in-depth information that can give you a more full picture of training. And social media is a breeding ground for trolls. And there are terrible people on social media. There are also some extremely wonderful people on social media. Some of you, all of you, I know, if you're here watching, you are the wonderful ones. But there can be some nasty people there, and those nasty people can be in charge of training pages. So both the pages, the followers, the commenters, like there can be just people who are just so, you just want to send them love because clearly they're suffering to make them so mean to other people, but they're there and we don't want to give them any time or space. Most importantly, though, with social media, keep in mind on your own training journey, comparison is the thief of joy. You're seeing other people's highlights reels. And while it can be helpful, I really hope you're not, beating yourself up in comparison to what other people are posting, saying, that type of thing. So please be mindful. Takeaways: social media is good for a lot of things. Great place to learn if you're following, the responsible people out there, but it can also be extremely dangerous and be full of misinformation. I recommend empowering yourself with the understanding that we do have science to back up a lot of the stuff that we talk about in dog training. Empower yourself understanding canine body language so that you can understand what's going on regardless of what people are saying. And know your own values when it comes to your dog, how you want to interact with your dog, what relationship you want with them. Be really clear in that and let that guide what information you're seeking out. And then just in general, proceed with mindfulness and curiosity. So be very mindful of the information you're taking in, who you're following. If something happens that you don't feel comfortable with, or that you don't like, or maybe that you do really like, just get curious. Like, remember that talk about science versus pseudoscience? What does this sound like? So just be careful. Okay. So this is a little bit of my information. I hope you come find me on social media if you don't already. We have about 5 minutes. I can't believe I talked for that long. Does anybody have any additional questions? And Stacy does bring up that some trainers can comment on body language and give incorrect interpretations, which is why I definitely urge people to learn about body language, maybe somewhere else. So like a book, or Lily Chin's doggy language book is incredible. And then watch those videos without sound, see what you see. And that I think is much more useful than watching or hearing body language breakdowns from different trainers who can, like I said, bring their own lens to the situation. Okay. I think, Miranda.
Yeah, we did it. And Stacy, yes, certifications, they're great. And they're also not great, just like much of humankind and much of the dog training industry. One of the things that I will say is really helpful for me in social media, as someone who is not quite as fluent in it as Juliana is. One of the things that's really helpful is if you find some pages that you really trust and that you really like, and then you find a new trainer and you're like, I have no idea, is this person legit? You go and see who follows them. And if I see that like Juliana follows this person and Mike Shikashio follows this person and several other trainers that I know and respect follow this person, I feel pretty good about the fact that this person is likely putting out some good information, versus if there is nobody that I follow that is also following this person. They might be new. Maybe I ask someone else, hey, have you heard of this account? I've been doing this a lot recently because we're looking for webinar speakers for next year. And so trying to vet folks and see what their experience is like. But it can be really helpful to go like, you got to trust someone. So if you trust a few people, they can help you navigate the rest of the sea of dog training out there. That can often be a good kind of at a glance way to see if maybe you want to watch that video or not.
Although interesting counterpoint to that, and I have this debate with fellow trainers, is that a like does not or like a follow does not necessarily mean an endorsement. I might be, so like, Shirag Patel, incredible trainer, bless his heart. He's like, I'll follow anyone. He's like, they follow me, I'll follow them back. I can support them on their journey. Like, he's so amazing and positive, and will like, and he like, no discretion, follows away. He's like, of course, I'm going to reinforce them for following me. I'm going to follow them back. I'm like, excellent. And I've talked to a few other trainers who have expressed like, somebody got so mad because they saw a like on this video, and it was like, whoa, 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 that doesn't mean that I'm like fully endorsing them. So just want to, I think we're all a little, again, everyone brings their own experience and that lens to it.
Yep, absolutely. So what you've learned today is nothing. Everything is complicated.
Everything is great.
But that's an important thing. I mean, this is something that Juliana and I have talked about a lot, which is why I forced her to do this webinar for us, because it is really easy on social media for the algorithm to pick something up. It becomes really big. There's a lot on social media that's kind of a mess. And it's really hard, even for people who do this professionally, sometimes to weed things out, where you see someone, you go, oh, they're lovely. And then you go, wasn't expecting that one. So it's hard to vet things, but the more that you get used to questioning some of these things and relying on some people, and going, well, this doesn't really match what the people I trust have been saying. Like, I wonder what the difference is here. It's hard,
get curious.
Yeah. But this is why we brought Juliana on, because she has an ungodly amount of followers on Instagram. She big and famous. She's real good at it. And it's a skill. I think that's the other thing, is like, there's lots of great trainers out there who are not great at Instagram because they're skills. Juliana happens to have both of them, but a lot of trainers for sure do not. And there's lots of trainers on social media who are good at social media, but maybe not that great at training. So
yes, big time. Be very wary of follower count.
Yes, absolutely. Awesome. Thank you all so much for being here. Thank you so much to Juliana for doing this crazy talk where I made her do something that is not dog training. But I think that this is a really important topic. Again, the recording will be up tomorrow. And we've got some exciting news coming up soon. So I hope you joined our mailing list when you signed up. There's going to be some fun things we're emailing about in the next couple of weeks. So thank you so much for being part of things. I hope you're following us on social media. And if you want cool reels, you definitely want to be following Juliana and not us, because we don't really do that. But I posted lots of stuff about skeletons and witches doing dog training for Halloween. So you get that. Awesome. Thank you so much for being here, and we will see you next time.
Bye, everyone.
Bye.